Hey now, I'm Dave Lemieux, and usually these are seaside chats, but the weather was really bad, so I'm doing it indoors today. I hope you don't mind. It might sound a little better, which is always good. Here to announce the Grateful Dead's 2023 box set. I guess now we can actually call it an annual thing. I guess we've been doing them for 15 years. Grateful Dead runs of shows or tours or whatever they've been. We've done something very special outside of the regular kind of Dave's Picks or Road Trips or Dick's Picks. We've been doing these box sets now for 15 years or more. Really, the annual, I think, started in 2011 with Europe 72, and really since then we've done something big. And it's, to me, I love working on the Dave's Picks so much. 4 times a year we do these Dave's Picks. Each one is its own production. It's its own little mini box set. But then once a year we also get to do a really big box set. And these are really exciting because they're 18 months of work. We started thinking about this one in early 2022. So we're going back almost a year and a half, certainly well over a year is when the decision is made on what we're going to do, and then we go into production on it, and then the packaging, and then the sound with Jeffrey Norman. So much. So if you're watching this, you probably already know that the 2023 box set is 5 complete shows covering 4 weeks of Grateful Dead performances, 5 straight shows. When they weren't actually on tour, but they were doing these big stadium shows every weekend for 4 weekends, 5 weekends with a weekend off towards the end, but then they did 2 shows at the end. So the shows specifically are May 13th in Des Moines, Iowa. I should also say 1973, spring of 1973, just on the cusp of summer. So we have May 13th in Des Moines, Iowa, May 20th in Santa Barbara, California. The May 13th show was at a big fairgrounds. I think there were 10 or 15,000 people at that. UC Santa Barbara Stadium, big outdoor stadium, football field, May 20th. And then the famous May 26th show at home in San Francisco, in the Haight, right on the border of Golden Gate Park, Kezar Stadium, May 26, 1973. Cornerstone of all of our tape collections back in the day. And then they took the next weekend off, but then the weekend of June 9th and 10th, of course, with the Allman Brothers, RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. So you get some Midwest, a couple of West Coast shows, and then a couple of East Coast shows to round out this tremendous, how many CDs is it? It's 17 maybe, 16, 17, I think it's 17 CD. It's 17. It's a big box set. And oh my gosh. This, to me, is some of the finest Grateful Dead music I've ever heard, and it's the sort of thing where, as I mentioned with the Kezar Stadium show, back in my tape trading days, 35, almost 40 years ago, a couple of my 1973 shows, I really didn't have that many 1973 shows, certainly not that sounded great as well. I had May 26th at Kezar, and I had June 10th at RFK Stadium. And those shows, as the old saying goes, I wore that tape out. And it goes for both of them. And then about, 25 years ago, 23, 24 years ago, I heard the other 3 shows in this box, Des Moines, Santa Barbara, and the first night at RFK, the June 9th show. And I had one of the sets from June 9th way back, but then I heard the whole show. And so over the years, a lot of consideration has been given to each of these shows for release. We kind of always thought the RFK shows would be their own thing, maybe a 6 or 7 CD box set someday. And then as we would often get close to releasing either the Des Moines show or the Santa Barbara show or the Kezar show, we thought the same thing. Let's maybe put those 3 May shows together. They only did 3 shows in May of 1973. Put those together as a box set. So we kind of always had this concept in mind, rather than put one out as a Dave's Picks or a Dick's Picks or a Road Trips. We would do them as a kind of a mini 9 or 10 CD box set, and likewise with the RFK shows. And then as the years have gone by, and our box sets do tend to be, 15 CDs, 12 at least, but 15 or more even, we have got, we started really heavily considering several years ago, actually, around the time of the Pacific Northwest box set, when we did the 3 shows from 1973 in the Pacific Northwest, and then a year later in 1974. So we started considering these 5 shows as a box way back then. And since then, we've done a few other, I think, great boxes. And last year was a 1981, 82, 83 from Madison Square Garden. And that's why, as we've always tried to do, bounce around a little bit. So we've had some box sets. We did one a few years ago that went right into 1991 at Giant Stadium with the 87, 89, and 91 Giant Stadium shows. And then last year, Madison Square Garden. And we've done the June of 1976 box set. So we've kind of had some really, St. Louis box, 71, 72, 73. So we've jumped around a lot as we try to do. And in this case, I mean, I think that these 5 shows in their entirety, they complement one another. They're very different shows. The set list, particularly of the first 3 shows, are very similar, but in typical Grateful Dead fashion. The performances are remarkably different. And for instance, the second sets of the first 3 shows, the Des Moines, Santa Barbara, and San Francisco shows, are largely structured around a truckin' other one, Eyes of the World. Eyes of the World was brand new at the time, debuted in February. So they were largely centered around those. The first sets had very, very varied set lists, drawing mostly on the material. Well, by this point, 8 years of Grateful Dead songwriting and performances, but a lot from the Europe 72, the new material, Brown Eyed Women, Tennessee Jed, Ramble on Rose, Jackstraw, a lot from Jerry's and Bob's 1972 solo records, songs like Sugary, Playing in the Band was a big one in these shows. Some great versions of Playing in the Band, as you probably know. I love Playing in the Band. I love this era of Playing in the Band. And we get some really great ones, usually towards the end of the first set. We get all that new material as well that had debuted in 72, summer of 72, Stella Blue, Mississippi Half Step, and then in February 73, the music that would become the cornerstone, the material that would end up on Wake of the Flood. And some of it would even end up a year after that on Mars Hotel, Wave That Flag, which was U.S. Blues, China Doll, which was actually recorded for Wake of the Flood, but then they re-recorded it and released it instead on Mars Hotel. But from the other 1973 new material, Road Jimmy, Here Comes Sunshine, Eyes of the World, as I'd mentioned. Some really, really incredible music. Now, the Grateful Dead's touring activities in 1973 were a little different than most years because they didn't do a big summer tour. They did some summer shows that were massive. We'll talk about those. So they did a tour in February of the Midwest. Then they did more of a kind of an East Coast tour, Nassau, Boston Garden, Utica, places like that, Springfield, Philly, Spectrum, in March going into April 2nd. And then between April 2nd and September 7th at Nassau Coliseum, there was no big tour. They did these 5 shows that are in this box. And then a couple of weeks after that, they did the Pacific Northwest run of 3 shows. And then 3 shows in LA at Universal Amphitheater. That was at the end of June going into July 1st of 1973. And then nothing in July until the very end. But then they did Watkins Glen, the biggest show they ever performed. And then a couple of shows at Roosevelt Stadium with the band right after Watkins Glen. And then nothing until September 7th. And the reason at Nassau Coliseum, the reason for that is they spent all of August of 73 recording Wake of the Flood. They recorded it at the Plant Studio in Sausalito, California. If you're ever in Sausalito, that building is still there. I believe the studio closed a few years ago. But if ever you're visiting the Bay Model, which is worth a trip if you're in the Bay Area. But if you're ever visiting the Bay Model, you'll see the Plant Studio. You can't miss it. A lot of great albums were recorded there in the 1970s. So they spent August in there recording. It came out in October of 1973. So a very busy year for the Grateful Dead. They were also starting their own record company, Grateful Dead Records, on which Wake of the Flood would come out. So with that in mind, rather than do these big tours while they're getting this new record company going, Pigpen passed away in March of 1973. So this was the kind of the definitive new Grateful Dead. Pigpen wasn't coming back, which in 1972, when he sat out in June, well, after the June show in Hollywood, I think there was always a hope that he would get healthy and come back, and that didn't happen. So this was the new Grateful Dead that would really be the defined Grateful Dead through the late 70s, with, of course, the return of Mickey Hart as well in 1976. So with that in mind, rather than do these big tours, the Grateful Dead did big one-offs. Des Moines, huge state fairgrounds. Like I say, 10 or 15,000 people. Santa Barbara, even bigger, well over 20 or 30,000. Kezar Stadium, 25,000. And then RFK Stadium, I don't know how many, but I've seen pictures, and the crowds are huge, and the stadium's huge. I saw the Dead there in 1989 and 1990, and crowds were big, stadium is big, and I thought it sounded pretty good. Where I was in the taper section at those shows, and I thought it sounded pretty good on the floor by the sound mixing station. So with that in mind, we've got these 5 shows. And like I say, the first 3, the second sets are largely centered around a truck and other one, but very different. It's the Grateful Dead, of course it's very different. And then some rock and roll endings with Sugar Magnolia, Casey Jones, the big rock and roll endings. There's also a lot of, I don't want to call them smaller jamming songs, but songs like Here Comes Sunshine that always clock in around 10 minutes with big jams in them. Playing in the bands, as I mentioned, they clock in the 20-minute range. So we've got so much incredible shorter songs and then the bigger songs as well in this box set. And then by the time they get to RFK, those 2 shows are very different than the first 3. The first RFK show, kind of one of those under the radar shows. When we did the Europe 72 box 13 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a show from May 24th, 1972 at the Lyceum, the second show of the 4-night run. A little under the radar, a little overshadowed by obviously the May 26th show, but even May 23rd and May 25th were also tremendous shows. But the May 24th, a little under the radar, incredibly well played. One of my favorite shows from Europe 72. And that's what I find about this show from June 9th of 1973. A little under the radar, certainly overshadowed by June 10th. But oh my goodness, is it ever good. Certainly do check this one out in depth. The second set jam in particular, no other one, but the way they jam the truckin' and then they do a playing in the band. And I mean, this is like seriously inspired Grateful Dead performing. So that's the first night. The second show, I almost feel it doesn't need any introduction, but I'm going to introduce it anyway. This is the show that opens with Morning Dew. It's got that bird song playing in the band. Here Comes Sunshine for the smaller songs, jamming songs, and then the only dark star in the box set is at the RFK show on June 10th. Like I say, Huge Eyes of the World. Just a really spectacular show. A show that the hype, it certainly is warranted. And you think of shows like Veneta and Cornell and Harper College, and I would certainly put June 10th, 1973 up there with those shows as one of the greatest Grateful Dead shows, a show that certainly should be in the canon, should be on your shelf, which is why it's part of this box set. Also, I should point out that, as you probably know, whenever we do a box set, we always take either one show as what we call the breakout show, or we do a compilation of the box set in this of the best material of it. In this case, we did a breakout show, and that is the June 10th show. So if you're not inclined to buy the whole box set, I don't know why you wouldn't be, it's really good. But if you only want the one show, June 10th, 1973, RFK Stadium, the show that I think has been on a lot of people's lists for decades as one of their favorite shows ever, is going to be available on its own as a 4 CD set, or I believe it's 8 LPs, a vinyl set. So you can get on vinyl, all mastered from the original analog tapes by Jeffrey Norman. Plangent Processes did the speed correction. It's interesting, this box set, unlike a lot of them, was recorded by 3 separate recordists, just the way it was in the Grateful Dead world at the time. Kid Candelario recorded some of it, Betty Cantor Jackson did, and Bear recorded some of it, the RFK shows. So we've got 3 tremendous recordists. They all sound great. They sound slightly different. Maybe nuanced would be a good way to put it, but they sound amazing. So you can get the final show, the RFK June 10th show, on its own or as part of the box set. And oh my goodness, is it ever sounding good. Jeffrey Norman has once again outdone himself. He's spent months on this. Jeffrey, thank you for making it sound so good. Also, the package, I gotta say, as you probably know, earlier this year, the Grateful Dead finally won their first ever Grammy. and it was for package design by our good friends Dave Van Patten and Lisa Glines and Doran Tyson. And a couple of those, Doran Tyson and Lisa Glines, a couple of those incredibly talented people are back on this one, as they do with all of our box sets, as the package designers and overseers, with Masaki as the package designer, the artist who's put it together. And Masaki's done some other work for the Grateful Dead, some of the coolest stuff we've ever seen in box sets of any sort. So with it's kind of like one of those dream teams of Masaki, Lisa, and Doran doing the package. Great photos throughout. The Owsley Stanley Foundation, Hawk and Starfinder have done an incredible job writing some notes about Bears recordings and the shows at RFK with the Allman Brothers. And Ray Robertson, if you got Dave's Picks 45, the 2 Portland shows from 1977 from Portland, Oregon, you probably read those liner notes, and Ray Robertson wrote those. A Canadian author, he's a novelist, an essayist, a short story writer, a poet, he does it all. He's a great writer, period. And he's written the liner notes for the box set, both the overarching piece that kind of sums up the era, and then the individual show notes for the 5 shows. And Ray is a true writer. And it's interesting because I write a lot of little notes for Dave's Picks and things like that. And I think I wrote a note for this one, for the box set. I mean, it's fine. I mean, I write what I know, which is, Grateful Dead music. But I'm certainly no writer. And then I read something by a real writer, by Ray Robertson. I'm like, okay, that's what a real writer can deliver that I can't. So anyhow, you're going to love these notes. Ray, thanks for coming through with great notes again. Check out Ray's books, by the way. He's a really, really incredible writer from Toronto. So check that out. So anyhow, I'm going to keep this brief. I think I'm clocking in over 15 minutes already. But again, this is the Here Comes Sunshine box set announcement. It's 5 shows from the spring of 1973, the late spring. 5 consecutive shows, May 13th, 20th, 26th, and then June 9th and 10th. They were doing a show per weekend for 3 weekends in a row, and then a weekend off, and then the 2 shows with the Allman Brothers. I should also add that the show on June 10th, 1973 at RFK Stadium features a 3rd set with a couple of members with the Allman Brothers that is included in this box set, is on the vinyl, is on the breakout show. So when we say that the June 10th, 1973 show is the complete show, it's the complete show featuring that 3rd set with a couple of the Allman Brothers rocking incredibly hard. Oh my gosh, some of the most inspired music I've ever heard by the Grateful Dead with special guests. It's up there with the Branford Marsalis level of special guest sit-in. Some really, really wonderful Grateful Dead music. So check it out. It's a limited edition, so it'll sell out soon, sooner than later. They always do. So check it out. And again, the June 10th show at RFK is available on its own, finally. Great show. But it's also part of this box set. Really a spectacular work of art, both visually but sonically. The music itself, incredible. So thanks a lot for watching. I'm Dave Lemieux, and sorry this is not a seaside chat. I filmed it yesterday, actually, in front of a lake. And it was out of focus, so I had to redo it, and today the weather is terrible. So it's too windy, too rainy, you would be distracted by the weather. So anyhow, hope you don't mind. Thanks a lot for sticking around, and I got my little remote control, going to shut it off, and we'll see you here next time with a Dave's Picks announcement in the not too distant future, I think, in a couple months. But Here Comes Sunshine, May and June 1973, 5 incredible shows by the Grateful Dead. See you around.